Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Insurance in an Instant. I'm your host, Vinay Galloway with Brock-Norton Insurance, and today our topic is going to be insurance requirements in government contracts. So we have a very special guest joining us today, who is an expert in her field, and that is government contracting. Please join me in welcoming Karen Long of Streamline Government Contracts. How are you doing today, Karen?
I'm doing great, Vinay. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, I'm so happy you were able to join us, Karen. Karen is the CEO of Streamline, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
I started out in government contracts back in 1999 and worked for a company, a government contractor, and worked my way up the ladder and went back to school for procurement and contract management, and went on and worked for some small and mid-sized companies after that. And I decided back in 2012 that I could help more companies by starting my own, and hence Streamline Government Contracts. So what Streamline Government Contracts does is we help small companies who don't need a full-time contracts manager, or mid-sized companies who need surge support, and anything from negotiating teaming agreements, negotiating subcontracts, helping track funding, meeting with contracting officers, preparing correspondence. So again, pretty much cradle to grave for companies who need some additional help.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Karen. Let's just dive right in. So the first question is for you, Karen. If the insurance limit requirements in the contract are significantly higher, talking 2, 3, 4, 5 million, than your current coverages, can you ask for a modification?
No, you can't ask for a modification after the contract is awarded, because that would affect the terms and conditions from which the RFP was released, and that may have influenced some companies to bid or not to bid. So the time to ask about changing the insurance limits would be when you get the RFP and you look at and you send your questions and answers to the contracting officer. So if you feel strongly that this is going to be a big burden on you, and that the insurance levels that the government's asking for are overkill, you can always try putting that again as a question to the government and see if they are happy, if they will oblige.
A lot of sense, because I would be mad if that was the one thing that stopped me from bidding, and then someone was just able to get it changed at the end of the day. So
I get what happens if it's a small business or any size business and they're not able to secure the insurance limits that they need to bid on the contract.
Yeah, we see that, because a lot of times, especially these smaller subs, if they don't have the revenue to support some of these large limits, it's very difficult for an insurance carrier to say, yeah, we want to give $10 million worth of limit to a company that maybe has 1.2 million in total revenue before even taxes and expenses. So what do we do in that situation? Well, one, some carriers, if you are able to provide the actual written contract that's requiring it, they will make exceptions for that. There has to be, of course, a business case for us to go through and do that. And another option is if you just aren't able to get what you need as far as limits, it's time, especially if you're a sub, to go back and see if you're able to secure those limits from your prime contractor and see if they can do some sort of bill back, making sure that you are an additional named insured as opposed to and just a plain additional insured or additional insured language. And that would give you the same rights to the policy as your prime. All right, Karen, well, the next question I have for you is, if I am a subcontractor, knowing what we just discussed, can you even negotiate the insurance coverages?
Yes, you can negotiate the insurance coverages or any other terms and conditions in the subcontract. However, what I would say is you need to have a valid reason, saying that a certain coverage costs a lot of money, etc., is not really going to make the prime want to change the coverage limits. What you want to do is to, two things. If the coverage is just totally out of the realm of what the work is and it has nothing to do with it, then obviously you can mention that to the prime. If it's that the limits are too high, you might want to make an argument such as, we only have 5 people on this contract or 3 people on this contract. It's a 50-person contract. I don't need to have the same coverages as you do because I have far fewer people on it. So as long as you can justify it and it makes sense to the prime, I have found that in most cases they are responsive to that. Okay, so I have a question for you. I get this from my clients a lot. They're often required endorsements like waiver of subrogation and 30 days notice of cancellation. Can you, I guess, first explain what waiver of subrogation is and then kind of explain why there's the 30-day notice of cancellation?
Be happy to talk to that. We get questions on waiver of sub all the time. So to kind of give you an example of what waiver of subrogation is, let's say I'm a government contractor and I happen to do electrical work and I hire a sub to run some cable and then there's a fire and we have this huge catastrophic loss. Well, even though I'm the prime on the contract and the contract is between me and the client, the insurance carrier will likely pay that claim, but they want to know if anybody outside of, the insured is negligent and responsible for the damage. If that is a yes, aka this subcontractor, they're going to want to go after the subcontractor, usually in a suit, to recover the costs that they paid out for the claim, knowing that it wasn't their fault and it wasn't the fault of their insured. Well, the waiver of subrogation essentially blocks the insurance company from doing that. And it's a tool used typically, 1, as a hold harmless, and 2, as a protection for the relationships that you're building with your clients, your subs, anybody who's working with you. But you'll see it a lot in, property, especially with landlords. When you go and you sign a lease, they want a waiver of subrogation in their favor. In case, there is something that happens. If there was water on the floor, somebody slips and falls, they want to maintain that relationship. In regards to the 30 days notice of cancellation, that also is pretty standard because me as a prime, if I'm giving you insurance requirements, I want to be sure that you're keeping that insurance in force. Who's to say what's stopping a subcontractor from, getting the insurance, making a payment, delivering the COI to you on time? But if they let it lapse after that and you've got multiple subs, how are you able to keep track of it? Well, that's where this endorsement comes in. If for any reason a carrier is looking to cancel coverage within the next 30-day period, that notice will go to the insured as well as anybody that they have per contract who's endorsed for 30 days notice of cancellation. And that gives you the red flag, like, oh, okay, I need to reach out to the sub and figure out what's going on. Are they replacing insurance or are they letting it lapse and then therefore in breach of contracts? I have another follow-up question for you in that. In the bidding process, it's a long process, but when should you actually begin to discuss the insurance requirements with you, with a contracting officer, with even us, a broker or an agent?
So when you get the solicitation, one of the things you should be looking at is all the terms and conditions. That is where the insurance requirements would be. And if there is something additional that you don't have, I would recommend that you go out to your broker and get a quote on what the additional cost will be, because it could possibly be a deal breaker for you. And again, this is the time to send your questions into the contracting officer and get those answered if you want to ask if the government would consider reducing the insurance benefits. And this is why it's really important to have a good relationship with your broker, because it's just going to make it that much easier if you're familiar with her or him. Vinay is, obviously is very knowledgeable and experienced. So I would recommend her, but you want to have that good relationship so that they know a little bit about you, your company, etc.
Well, thank you for that, Karen. And I agree with you. It's also very important to have someone like Karen in your corner when you're going through the process, especially if it's a newer process, just so you understand the importance of timelines and making sure that you're checking the boxes when they need to be checked. Because even as a broker, no matter how good we are, it's incredibly difficult to talk to an insured who's just been awarded a contract and needs to provide a COI within 13 hours.
So next question. So again, people are seeing this more and more in their contracts. Although I will say a lot of companies feel like they do not need cybersecurity insurance, and that seeing a lot in contracts these days. In most cases, for IT services, etc., it is a requirement now, and the prime is probably going to mandate that you have it. What does cyber liability cover, and is it affordable for smaller companies?
And that's a great question. Cyber liability is definitely becoming commonplace. And it should be, especially now when we're dealing with, COVID and quarantine. Everybody is relying so much more on technology, and we have to be cognizant of, hackers and people who are out there not necessarily to do good things. With that being said, there's definitely different types of cyber liability. You can endorse it to an existing policy like a BOP or general liability policy. We typically recommend standalone, but it really depends on what you're doing. In that case, I would say for cyber liability, for government contracts, it's definitely beneficial to have a standalone policy. A lot of them, depending on the insuring agreements, will cover first party and third party, as well as some fees. So if you had a breach and you didn't notify in a set period of time, there usually are governmental, fees and penalties that need to be paid that a cyber liability policy will cover. With that being said, each of these policies are different. The carriers are different. The language is different. So again, even though this is a high-level overview, we always recommend that you go to an agent who has experience in these policy lines and really ask them what you need and break it down so you as the insured understand what the policy is designed to do and what it covers if you do have a claim. In regards to the affordability, like I said, it depends on the type of coverage you're getting. Endorsements tend to be less expensive. If you are a small business contractor, typically $1 million to $2 million is what you're going to see on those requirements. That is something that can be endorsed, but it depends on the level of coverage you're looking for. For the larger companies, and that could be, relative, but having the standalone policies, depending on what limits you have, the range is quite great. So it can be pretty affordable in the range of $2,000 to $3,000, all the way up to tens of thousands of dollars for the much higher limits in the $10 million range. So a little bit across the board, but make sure you have a good ally, and, and then we'll be able to help you ascertain what your costs will be.
What are some additional requirements or tips that government contractors should keep in mind to protect themselves?
Great. Well, I will definitely start in on the insurance side. It's very important to recognize, what it is that you're doing. What is this contract for? And that really guides the understanding of what types of coverages you need and what types of policies you should be obtaining. If you're doing international work, you should be looking at DBA. If you're doing international work in a more dangerous area, you should be looking at kidnap and ransom and extradition. As far as construction, do you have bonding? If you have consent of surety or bonding requirements, we want to make sure that those are taken care of, because that's not a short process, depending on the size of the company. So especially with surety, these carriers want to be really comfortable with the risk, and some will ask for, personal indemnity. And that has to be a conversation that you're willing to have, especially if you're married. Professional liability and completed operations are also very important for construction workers. Is your contract associated with working on or near water? We have a lot of clients that work with Department of Naval Research. They need U.S. longshore and harbor workers or marine coverage. So on the insurance side, we'll keep it to, it depends on what you're doing. But definitely have a conversation and really try to dig in and figure out where those coverages should be aligned. Anything else from you, Karen? What else should GovCons be thinking to protect themselves, or even just to be more cognizant of what it is they're bidding on?
Yeah. I would say to plan ahead. Again, look at that RFP and look at those. What are look at the insurance requirements early. They may affect your pricing. So, especially if it's a more expensive type of coverage that you didn't previously have, and now you're going to have to carry it. So, the time to look at it would be early in the RFP, so you can let your pricing person know that as well. The other thing is, a lot of times the larger GovCons will give the smaller companies a draft sub-K with a draft subcontract with the insurance requirements. And recently I had a client ask, do I need to get this coverage when we submit the bid? And the answer is no. You would need to get it upon award, but you don't need to get it upon bid, because the company may or may not win the contract that you're bidding with. Hopefully they win, but you don't need to cover that period of time when you're not actually doing the work.
Good, great. Well, I know we've just given you a lot of information, a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, but definitely thank you for joining us. And special thanks to you, Karen, for taking time out of your schedule. So if you have any questions on contracts or specifics for Karen, we have included her contact information here.
So Streamline focuses, obviously we talk with our clients and find out what their needs are, and then negotiating teaming agreements and subcontracts, and tracking the funding during the contract to close out. So a lot of companies use us for their point of contact for the government. If you have questions, as Vinay said, there's my contact information. And again, Vinay, really appreciate you having me. It's great to have a contact like you that's so knowledgeable, and again, lots of experience with insurance.
It's my pleasure, Karen, and I know you have been a great resource for me as well, and a great help to many clients, and hopefully future or prospective clients that'll be looking to this for some help and some guidance. So as always, if you have any additional questions for us here at Brock-Norton, you can send them to me at vinay@brocknorton.com. Again, this has been Insurance in an Instant, and we really appreciate your support and continued listening. Until next time, have a great day.